Sit back whilst I tell you the story of Emily Sangster and a family filled with woe and misfortune. Some family trees have nothing but joy and good fortune entwined along their branches. Some begin tragically and grow lucky in time. But some, like the Sangster family of Halton Village, would never know the wonder of peace and goodwill. Let me take you back to the Boxing Night of 1972, 48 years ago this very night. In order for me to tell my tale, we need firstly travel back, even further to the times when Halton Village stood alone. Back at the turn of the 20th century, the village was almost rural. The town of Runcorn ended at the village, and there were fields and hedgerows as far as the eye could see. The village is not like that today. The 60s saw the emergence of estates which would block Halton Village in on all sides. Somehow that's seen as progress. Now Cyril and Martha Sangster moved into the village in 1899. They'd been married for more than 25 years and had one child, a son, Cyril Jr. At the onset of the Great War, Cyril Jr. was a gifted carpenter and had made much of the furniture that adorned his parents' house. He was eager to enlist and serve his country. His parents insisted that Cyril Jr.'s wife needed him at home, but undeterred, off he went to war, leaving his wife to look after the home and pray for his return. He hadn't been gone more than 3 months when he contracted pneumonia in the trenches. He died of fever, Boxing Day, 1914. His wife Susanna was beside herself with grief, and she locked herself away for months, only coming back out into the world when she realised she could no longer hide the pregnancy that she hadn't had chance to tell Cyril Jr. about. In his grief, Cyril's father went out into the fields with a shotgun, turned it on himself, and tragically ended his own life. He left behind his widow, Martha. Susanna moved in with Martha so that she could help care for the expected grandchild. Susanna gave birth in the late spring of 1915 to a healthy baby boy. She was taking no chances inviting bad luck with the name Cyril, so the child was christened Charles William Sangster. He had his father's eyes and his mother's gentle temperament, and for a time Martha and Susanna were happy rearing the child. Sometime after Charles's 6th birthday, Susanna, having gone shopping for vegetables for the Christmas Day dinner, was hit on her way home by a horse and cart after the horse bolted in fright in the dark. Susanna was in hospital in critical condition, and with her mother-in-law and son by her bedside, she died. Boxing Night, 1921. The boy, too young to understand that his mother would never come back, took it in a stride and grew, with the help of his grandmother, into a fine, healthy young man. He inherited the home on the death of Martha and moved in with his wife Charlotte. Charlotte came to believe that she would never be blessed with children. She and Charles were healthy enough, but it never really happened with them. And then when Hitler invaded Poland, signalling the beginning of World War II, at 24 years old, Charles was forced to leave his wife behind and join the troops in Europe fighting. Charlotte wept for months and prayed every night that her beloved Charles would return to her. And when the war came to an end, he did. A little shell-shocked but otherwise unscathed, it seemed at last some luck had befallen the Sangster family, but the best was yet to come. Within 2 months of his return, Charlotte found herself pregnant. She saw it as a miracle that fortune had brought Charles home and given them a gift to make up for the lost time together. The house buzzed with excitement whilst the happy couple awaited the arrival of their new baby. Emily Sangster arrived in the early summer of 1946, a bouncing baby girl, with the bluest eyes and the brightest smile of any newborn. Their family was complete. Charlotte was the perfect doting mother, and Charles took himself off to work every day to feed his family. For almost 30 years the family were the happiest in the village, friends with everyone in the community and regulars at church. Every Sunday, Emily joined in with the tiny church choir and learned to sing soprano in the sweetest of voices. Emily soon fell in love with a young man called Richard, but she was so devoted to her mum and dad that she kept poor Richard dangling on a string for more than 8 years, always promising to marry but never really committing to him. But Richard was in love, and after all it was the swinging 60s, so he was prepared to wait for as long as it took. Charles and Charlotte, Emily's parents, were creatures of habit. They opened their home to the neighbours in the village every Boxing Night for a social gathering. Typical of its time, the evening would include a spread of sandwiches, cakes, mince pies, cheese and pickled onions on sticks, all standing proud from a cabbage wrapped in foil for the purpose. Emily always played the dutiful daughter on these nights and opened the door to welcome guests, gave out drinks whilst Mum and Dad sat in the centre of the guests by the roaring fire, decorated with tinsel and pine cones. Emily was loved by everyone, loved for her pleasant disposition, her beaming smile and her longing to help others. Richard knew that he would always come second to those who really needed the time and support of his girlfriend. He grew to accept it and loved her even more because of it. Boxing Night 1972 was a particularly busy one. The weather was cold, so neighbours stayed in the village and made the decision to meet the Sangster house instead of travelling further afield to their families. The Christmas tree twinkled invitingly in the window, calling like a welcome beacon to the surrounding houses from the slightly open window. Emily's boyfriend was in charge of the music, and all the current hits from T-Rex and even little Jimmy Osmond were played to a happy, relaxed crowd. This was Emily's idea of life, to live amongst people surrounded by happiness and ensuring that no one ever really felt left out, particularly at Christmas time when loneliness is felt more keenly. Richard put on Emily's favourite record, Crocodile Rock, and before she knew it, she was leading the dancing into the cramped sitting room, and everyone was joining in except Mum and Dad, who sat dignified by the fire, watching with smiling faces. Nobody knows exactly what happened that night. Perhaps it was the fashion of the day that helped to cause the tragedy. People wearing maxi dresses and flares made of rayon, the most flammable fabric known to man. But Emily, dancing close to the fire, stumbled backwards and fell onto the log fire. Within seconds, panic ensued as people were pushed out the way by Richard to get his girlfriend, who was now enveloped in searing hot flames, as the fabric held no mercy. The decorations caught fire, as did the tablecloth and the table sitting next to the fire. There was no real explanation as to how the blaze took control so quickly, but suddenly there was a hurried rush to the door with people pushing to get out and jamming the exit to the hallway. Richard grabbed Emily and flung a throw around her from off the settee and raced with her out of the back door and into the garden, rolling her into the snow as soon as he possibly could. Being Boxing Night, the fire brigade took slightly longer than usual to get there, and the ambulance longer still. By the time the fire was out, the house had been all but gutted. Everyone had escaped, except for two. Emily's parents, Charles and Charlotte's remains, were found behind the door of the sitting room. It had closed against them as they attempted to flee the blaze and had been overcome by smoke. Charles was still embracing his wife when their bodies were discovered. Nobody told Emily about her mother and father until she was well enough to hear the news some weeks later. The pain she was in could not even be eased by morphine, and the scars disfigured her so dreadfully that she screamed out when she first saw her reflection in the mirror. Richard never stuck around. He promised that he would, but he never did. He couldn't look at Emily without displaying his discomfort at the way her appearance had changed so dreadfully. In the end, Emily wanted him to go and leave her alone with her memories. She couldn't stand the pity in Richard's eyes or the knowledge that he would never really see her the same again. She felt worthless, and for the first time in her life knew the true meaning of loneliness. She would soon find out the true meaning of the word cruelty too. People in the village were kind enough and even shopped for her for the first few months after the accident. She'd been housed by an elderly lady who lived close by, and alone in a house far too large for one. But Emily spent most of the days alone in one room, wondering what the use of her life was now. Emily grew more agoraphobic as the months went on, and when one particularly cruel woman asked her to walk to the shops via a different route to avoid passing the school and scaring the primary children, Emily couldn't take the sense of shame any longer. She locked herself away. 2 years of struggling with the pain from the burn scars and having no one to talk to had taken its toll on poor Emily. She remained isolated in her room, alone with her memories of times past and Christmases that were warm and joyous. It was Boxing Night 1974 when everything came to a head for Emily. She sat alone listening to the radio, her only company as there was no television in the old lady's house. And when the song Lonely This Christmas came drifting from the speakers, Emily realised she'd had enough. It wasn't hard to take all the painkillers. Emily had grown used to taking tablets. She just swallowed the bottle full with her evening drink and retired to bed as if it was any normal night. She never woke up. People talk of Emily Sangster to this day. The house in which she grew up was demolished after the fire, and there's just a small piece of vacant land where it once stood. Everybody knows that Emily never truly left. She never left the house or the area. and to this day her presence is felt by those who don't know her story. Her life was lived for others, and the greatest heartbreak was that she died having so much more to give. So she guards the people of Runcorn, even if they don't know it. Her spirit has walked amongst us for the past 46 years, seeking out the lonely and the isolation of others. Even you will have met Emily if you live in the area, whether you know it or not. Have you ever glanced into a mirror and your eye catches something in the reflection? That's Emily standing next to you. Of course you have to be alone and feeling sad, because it's those emotions she latches onto the most, having felt them herself. You must at some stage have smelled burning when there was nothing on fire. That's Emily, who carries the tangible memories of the night when her life changed forever. Ever been sitting alone and caught something moving in the corner of your eye, and when you look back there's nothing there? Emily's beside you, ensuring that you aren't lonely. Of course, sometimes Emily doesn't realise that some people have keener senses than others, and they are the people who, when they encounter her spirit, never really recover from the experience. Even the kindest spirit can frighten us out of our wits. Tonight, Boxing Night of all nights, is when Emily goes further abroad amongst us to offer solace to those who were alone at Christmas, because it was this very night she chose to end her life. When you brush your teeth tonight, try not to catch a glimpse of Emily in the mirror, and when those shadows in the darkened bedroom move, that's not your mind, that's just Emily wanting to tuck you in. Good night.